Hello, everybody.
Oh, hey there.
Welcome to Take Your Vitamin D&D RPGs as a Tool for Growth. How are you enjoying your PAX so far?
That's
Awesome.
good. That's a good.
My name is Adam Davis. I have a master's in education with a specialization in drama therapy, and I'm one of the executive directors of Game to Grow. Who are you guys?
I'm Virginia Spielmann. I'm a British-trained occupational therapist. I'm the executive director of STAR Institute for SPD in Colorado, and I am one of the developers of Critical Core, and so I get to play with the Game to Grow guys sometimes.
Oh, there's some fans of either occupational therapy or STAR or Critical
Or
Core.
Game to Grow.
Or Game to Grow. I'm Adam Johns. I'm the other executive director of Game to Grow. I have my master's in psychology, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
So raise your hand if you are someone who thinks that games have improved your life.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
Well, I mean, pretty obvious. This is a good crowd for that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic crowd for that. That right there is why Game to Grow exists. So I mentioned earlier that Adam and I are the executive directors. We're also the founders of Game to Grow, which is a nonprofit organization based in the greater Seattle area. And we are dedicated to the use of games of all kinds, but most specifically role-playing games, to help kids build social skills. So a lot of our players come to us with some degree of social setback. It might be related to a diagnosis, sometimes not. And then we use Dungeons & Dragons or similar role-playing games to help them come out of their shells, make friends, sometimes for the very first time. We run 5 weekly groups, serving almost 40 kids a week. Anything else you want to add to that, Adam?
We're actually expanding our groups right now. So we're hiring new facilitators. A big part of Game to Grow's goal is to serve as many people as possible, to get these kinds of services into as many places as possible. And we'll talk a little later about Critical Core and the Kickstarter, and where sort of that idea came from and everything like that. But a big part of the goal of that is to get games into more homes, into more hospitals, schools, libraries, help more people use games to help them grow and improve their lives.
So we get a question a lot about why? Why do we use games the way that we do? Why do we run therapeutic social skills groups using role-playing games? And Adam and I have talked at a couple of different cons about why we use games. And so we're going to talk about these 4 reasons why role-playing games specifically help people build social skills and social capacity. So we're going to go through these one at a time. Then we're going to talk a little bit about social skills in general, social capacity in general, and then we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can take home some of the tips and tricks that we've learned over our years of doing this into your personal game to make it more enriching for you and your loved ones. Hopefully you play with loved ones.
Plus, we'll probably leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A if anybody has any questions, just because that's fun to do. I like Q&A.
So let's start at the beginning with perspective taking. What's so fantastic about role-playing games is that they provide you an opportunity right out of the gate to play a character who ideally has different ideas, different thoughts, different feelings and experiences that you have.
So a lot of this gets into the idea of theory of mind. Now, anybody in the audience, psychology minors, psychology majors, that kind of thing, involved in the mental health field at all? Awesome. So the idea behind theory of mind is basically that this is a concept that you develop in your childhood development when you get to a certain age generally. The theory of mind skills that you develop, you continue to develop for the rest of your life. But theory of mind is the concept that you can understand that somebody other than you has different thoughts, feelings, and desires. They have different internal things that are happening, and having that conceptualization for that is a big part of being able to take perspective. They actually test theory of mind in a really interesting way. This is called the unexpected contents test. And the way that it works is you have the person administering the test takes a box that says it's candy, and they show it to a child, and they say, what do you think is in the box? And the child will say candy. And then the person will open the box and reveal that inside is not candy, but it's in fact crayons. And then the child will say, the test administrator will say, what do you think is in the box now? And they say crayons because they know. And then they'll turn and they'll say, for your friend, what do you think, if I did the same thing for your friend and I closed up the box and showed them, what would they say is in the box? And children that have not yet developed theory of mind skills will say crayons, because they don't yet understand that their friend is going to be fooled by the same trick that this horrible person has played on them. But ones who have developed theory of mind skills will understand the difference between this other person who doesn't yet have their knowledge. And they will say, candy. Did I mix that up? Yes. I mixed it up? Okay. I lost track of my story. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Theory of mind skills are very interesting because they develop at a pretty early age, but what's amazing about it is that we continue to develop them well into adulthood, well into later parts of our lives. I'm still developing theory of mind skills now. When I'm headed into the con and I get stopped by a stoplight and I'm angry at the people who are driving in traffic and I'm saying, how dare you, I'm supposed to be at a panel. I'm not practicing good theory of mind skills. Those people obviously have no concept for me being late to a panel or trying to make it to a con or anything along those lines, but I make generalizations about that. And it's a lot about perspective taking, it's a lot about theory of mind skills. Do you want to jump in, Virginia?
I do. I think what's important that we're discussing nowadays with our understanding based on neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology is that theory of mind and empathy are very different. And so some of our children have really exquisite empathy, and it really can be quite overwhelming for them. But because their theory of mind is tricky and their perspective taking is tricky, they don't express it very well. And so the expression of empathy and the ability to express it in a way that works for the other person is very different to not having empathy at all. And so the kind of skills that you're practicing in role-playing games really help you with that ability to translate what you're saying so that it makes sense for the other person.
Especially kind of linking them together, right? Mm-hmm. Linking together perspective taking and theory of mind when they aren't necessarily connected that way. And we actually use this really, really intentionally a lot of times in our games, sometimes in a very practical way as we're running role-playing games. And what's amazing about role-playing games is it's theory of mind from multiple perspectives. It's perspective taking from all sorts of different angles. I'm not just thinking about the perspective of my character. I'm also having to think about the perspective of the other players at the table, the perspective maybe of the dungeon master, and I'm having to think about the perspective of the other players' characters at the table through the lens of the perspective of my character. So there's a lot of deep levels when you think about having to take different perspectives, having to think about what somebody else's thoughts, feelings, and desires might be in projected in all these different levels. That's amazing practice, and it all happens while you're just having a fun time playing games at the table. But we sometimes use it a little more intentionally. Adam, do you have a story about this?
We do this all the. I mean, this is, like I said, this is totally built in, and we have different in-game encounters we use very specifically to sort of highlight in order to talk about these kinds of things. So we have one of the plot lines we've done over and over again. I think I might have talked about this on other panels. I'm a big fan of the movie They Live. Anybody else? Okay, awesome. Good. Roddy Piper. And in the movie, there are sort of shape-shifting monsters from outer space. And so I totally stole that plot line. And in my in-game storyline, there are these shape-shifting monsters from beyond time and space. And they blend in, they look just like regular people. And the only way to see them is with one particular magic device. Which we named the Ventrani lens, named after the evil Dr. Ventrani who made this monocle. And the thing is about this device is it only worked for one of my players. So at any time that the group had to go meet and talk to an NPC, he was the only one who could look through the monocle and see if the NPC was really a shape-shifting monster. And so I would then be playing the NPC, and the players would all have to sort of like ask him to look through the monocle, and then I would tell him, oh yeah, it's a terribly looking, it's got the predator mandibles and everything. And then the other players would then want to act under that understanding because I mentioned it to him, but then I have to say, no, you need to tell them in character so that they will understand. And every time this happened, he would then need to remember that my fellow players don't know that this is the case, and so we're just reinforcing theory of mind skills all the time. We have other encounters with ghosts that only one person can see, and then the players have to sort of tell each other what is happening. But this comes up all the time, and it's really important because, like Adam was saying, there's so many times in our lives where we are faced with a frustration where someone else doesn't know what we need. And being able to understand that and then express that to somebody else is a really, really valuable social skill. Anything else on perspective taking?
I was actually just going to say that, like, you probably actually already do this if you're a game master, a dungeon master in your game. You probably do this all the time, maybe entirely unintentionally. If you ever have everybody like roll a nature check or roll a perception check, and only one person succeeds, and then you go, well, what does your character say to the rest of the party? That's all that forced perspective taking. When that player turns around and goes, nah, I don't say anything. And now all the players at the table now all have to pretend they don't know that knowledge, that there's totally like a horde of undead that are coming through the forest at them. That's all perspective taking. You're all trying to act under a different set of knowledge than the knowledge you actually have.
Or if your players are like our players sometimes and they have sort of an encyclopedic knowledge of the monster manual.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, I know for a fact that there's an ice wall back there because I know that white dragons sometimes breathe ice onto the wall and they hide their horde back there. And I was like, your character doesn't know that, but make a perception check and we'll see if you can see the ice wall. You don't make it. Oh.
Adam actually had a great puzzle the other day where he had a player who was playing a barbarian character, who the player was brilliant, and Adam introduced basically like an on-paper puzzle that the characters had found, a cipher. And all of the players were all trying to work together to solve the cipher, but the player who was playing the barbarian solved it like right away, super fast. But of course, because the barbarian can't read, that player had to basically pretend to not know how to solve the cipher for a super long time while they watched the rest of the table struggle to solve this puzzle.
And the player was like, I guess I'll fight the monsters while they solve the puzzle. That is super important that you fight those monsters.
Yeah.
But that actually caused a really important conversation for how we, like, I obviously knew the puzzle before we started it, how we support other people along the way to help them figure it out by understanding where they are and what they need to get to solving the puzzle. Because I let that player chime in a little bit, but it's really hard to know the answer to a linear puzzle and not just give the answer away. So it actually provided this amazing opportunity for how do you actually scaffold some hints for somebody without giving the whole puzzle away. But actually, linear puzzles are a great segue to the next thing we're going to talk about, which is frustration tolerance. Because a lot of times with linear puzzles, it is either you get it or you don't get it. And sometimes not getting it can be super frustrating.
So we learn frustration tolerance naturally as through relationships and through play. And so when we're growing up and we want to play with our mum who's too busy or our older sibling who isn't interested, we stick with it, right? Because we're really interested in the relationship. And it's usually through play as well. Like we really want to build the tower of blocks and it's really tricky. And our baby sister keeps knocking it over and we keep trying and we keep trying. And what happens often with clinicians and educators is that we take these kids who haven't built those skills yet, the skill of frustration tolerance, and we train it to them. We teach it to them as if it's a discrete skill, as if it's got rules, as if it's something nice and neat that we can package. And so, and we time them maybe, or we measure it in some artificial way. The thing that's great about role-playing games is you have all those organic opportunities again to stay regulated even though you've rolled like 5 ones. Or your friend is making a decision that is not in the best interests of the party. What do they think they're doing? But if you want to get anywhere, you have to stay sitting at the table. You can't flick the table over. You can't throw the dice on the floor, right? So we have this natural opportunity to sort of mimic what didn't happen in these children's early development, for them to learn to stay calm under pressure, to tolerate obstacles, failures, and to cooperate with other people. So it's really, really nuanced, and it's really, really organic, and therefore we think it's powerful, and it generalizes to their day-to-day life much more.
I think it really changes that there's like a level of motivation that really exists there. Like the role-playing game experience is fun. And especially if you have a good game master, a good dungeon master who can help you realize that failure in the game is not rolling a 2. Our worst roll is a 2. A 1 is an exciting roll. A 2 is the worst roll. If you roll a 2, the experience that you have is like still goes forward, and you still have fun. The game doesn't end. You don't really like ruin your experience because of that failure. And
the game has, if you're playing a D20 based game, there is a 5% chance anytime you roll that you will get a critical fail. Also 5% chance you're going to get a critical success, but that's a really important thing, also a lesson for young people to walk away with, is that sometimes things you've done a million times, you're going to mess up. And that's just part of life. Like I run into doors sometimes. I open lots of doors. It's part of me being an adult. I open doors and I walk through them. But sometimes I just don't open them right, and then I sort of hit it with my shoulder. And that just happens. And every time that happens, I can have a good sense of humor about it. But also, like, that's just part of life. And it's a really important thing to build that sort of sense of resilience. So, I can laugh about it. I can laugh about, like, falling up the escalators earlier today. And that's really important, being able to find joy in a failure, and an opportunity for growth, and an opportunity to connect with somebody else, maybe about that time I fell up the escalators, which I'm going to keep laughing about.
I feel like now I kind of want to play a D&D game where I make my players roll for everything. You go up the stairs. Okay, give me a dexterity save. let's see if you're gonna fall your way up these stairs.
And that would actually be a really useful way to build some theory of mind for those of us that actually struggle a little bit sometimes walking up those stairs. It might be like a nice opportunity for people to see what it feels like to, like, question every time you walk upstairs whether or not you're gonna make it.
Yeah, absolutely. But plus, I like the idea of a critical success in that case. Like, what does that look like? You just rocket up these stairs.
Yeah,
you
walk up
dance?
up the side rail.
2 steps at once. Whoa! you're really killing these stairs. You're destroying it.
Adam mentioned earlier that one of the worst rolls at our table is a 2, and that's because we try to make the game as fun as possible and let our players fail forward. You might have heard that before. That is when the failure is not a setback, it's an opportunity to try something different. So we try to build critical failures in as opportunities for interesting things to happen. Sometimes 2 is like boring, 1 is exciting, which is why 2s are the worst roll. So there was one of my favorite examples of this, because it comes up later in creative problem solving, is when I had my players searching in a supply closet for a secret door. And they were looking for the secret door. They were looking, flipping over the boxes and things. And a player rolled to, I think it was 3-5, so it was a search. And he found a box of pineapples.
Because he rolled a 1.
He rolled a critical fail and found a box of endless pineapples. Which is not the secret door, but it's a critical fail. You were so excited about this box of endless pineapples that you can't possibly search for a secret door anymore. And then he had that box of endless pineapples and then used it to solve every problem that they came across going forward.
Is this yet another problem that can be solved with pineapples? Well, if you have enough of them.
Yep, just turn it over and shake it. Pineapples keep coming out. Oops.
We had a group running with a young man in it who had a really hard time with things not going his way, and he kept rolling 1s. He was a dwarf who was very, very proud of his beard. And so instead of dying, because that wouldn't have been fair, he kept tripping over his beard every time he rolled a 1. And so he tripped over his beard so many times, and you could see how hard he was working to be okay with this storyline. Like, this was not cool. He had these amazing creative ideas, amazing imagination, but he kept rolling 1s. And so he was coming to the end of his limit. He'd been pushed far enough, and the DM said, what do you want to do about it? And so he took his knife out and he grabbed his beard, and in the name of the party and the adventure, he cut his beard off and he went forward, right? It was so amazing. And he went on in the adventure, and he was thinking about his friends, he was staying calm, and he mastered that challenge that he had of, like, really frankly wanting to flip the table over, but realizing now wasn't the time.
That's a good story.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
And that's a super important skill, because a lot of our players struggle with frustration tolerance. They struggle getting through a school day. They struggle sitting in class. Maybe there's a pop quiz that day. And so our goal is for a player who's in class and oftentimes might have office referrals, might have an anxiety response or something where they need to leave and go talk to a school counselor. Our goal is to have them build up that frustration and tolerance through their character, that they can sit and when the teacher comes and says, guess what, guys, today is a math pop quiz. When on a normal day they might leave, what we want them to do is think, what would my character do? My character survived a room that was slowly filling up with lava, so I can survive a math test.
And there was a piece of research that came out called What Would Batman Do? They had these, did you hear about it? They had these kids try to do a task that involved executive function, a lot of executive function, so like impulse control, cognitive shifting, some of these higher level skills that really develop later in life. And these kids didn't do very well at it. But then when they pretended to be their favorite superhero and they put on a cape or a Batman mask, they did the same task again and they were much more successful. It was significant. And so that ability to kind of have some distance and say, well, what would Batman do? What would my favorite hero do? Really, we see that it really helps young children, tweens, teens, who have a hard time with these executive function skills, which really feeds into frustration tolerance, just gives them pause, gives them that moment to be successful.
You know, that actually makes me think of like gaming and being tilted in gaming. Is everybody familiar with the term tilting? And how much better that would be if I like kept a Batman outfit around, and then put on like a mask and a cape. Like, man, this League of Legends match is not going well. I've got the perfect solution. Batman would not be frustrated by me getting killed that many times. Yeah, I like
Respawn.
Respawn. Who? Tell me who bottom lane is.
That was a deep cut right there. That was good.
It's a pretty deep cut.
Yeah. We gave a talk at the Play Therapy conference last weekend. That wouldn't have worked.
I don't think it would have flown. Yeah.
So the concept of creative problem solving comes up a lot in Dungeons and Dragons or other kind of our role-playing game. Also, I mentioned earlier linear puzzles. There's lots of different ways one can, as a game master, create in-game challenges for players. There is like a linear problem you have to solve with one solution, but one of the ways that we like to design the in-game encounters is to have a problem that has lots of different types of solutions.
So one of our favorite ways to do this is one of the early puzzles that we come up with is often called the lever puzzle. So the way that this works is that the players walk into a room. In the room, you can see that there's dust on the walls. The walls and the floor and the ceiling are all made of stone. And across the other side of the room, you can see a wooden door with metal portcullis, or bars that can raise and lower, down in front of the door. And in the very center of the room is a massive lever. And as the players come in, inevitably, somebody says,
I want to pull the lever.
Yeah, because why wouldn't you? And as soon as you pull the lever, you can hear the door behind you slam shut and click to lock. And then you can hear gears churn underneath you and up across the walls and then eventually into the ceilings. And you watch as slowly a series of spikes are lowered from the ceilings and the ceiling steadily starts lowering towards you. And that's the end of the puzzle as far as we have planned it as the game master. The rest of that puzzle is an open-ended challenge. The responses to the puzzle are about what the players decide to do. What we're looking for is opportunity for them to problem solve this interesting puzzle in interesting ways. So we've had lots of players try lots of different things. We've had wizards search the walls for maybe magical stones that might be fake or illusions. We've had people pull the lever out of the ground and try to get into the gearing underneath. We've had people jam pineapples up into the ceiling to halt the entire mechanism.
It gets kind of gummy when you have that many pineapples.
Yeah.
Sticky.
One of my favorite solutions was that we had the party picked up the dwarf and just slammed him into the portcullis until it bashed it open, which he was fine with. The dwarf agreed to it. But all of those solutions present an opportunity. We don't want it to be a prescribed puzzle. We want it to be an open-ended challenge where your creativity can be a part of the answer to it. And of course, because it's a social skills group, we also want to award the really team-oriented creative problem solving as much as possible. The dwarf one, as goofy as it is, was the whole team working together. And that we want to really orient towards and really want to like yes and any solutions that maintain a team perspective.
Dungeons & Dragons is a cooperative game. You all understand, for the most part, when you're playing with the right group of people, everybody is working together towards a common goal. This is a fantastic thing for our participants to consider, that they can work with other people towards a common goal. This is fantastic. And oftentimes, parents and teachers will use the word cooperate like they use the word compromise. I heard a in the audience, yeah. There's a lot of times they'll say, you two need to compromise. You two need to cooperate on this. And then cooperation feels like maybe a bad thing, because cooperate means you two need to both give up something to get what you want out of the situation. So we prefer to consider collaboration instead of cooperation or compromise. So collaboration is when two people or more can work together and not just accomplish that goal, but can build on each other's ideas and accomplish even more than either one of them could do on their own.
So has anybody here ever been to any of our collaborative homebrew panels? Oh, awesome. So Adam and I do a lot of homebrew within our groups, where we collaboratively create the entire world with the players. We'll create a map, we'll create rumors, story hooks, things that exist in the world. We're actually doing this at a panel on Saturday. We're going to do another collaborative homebrew panel with some special guests joining us for that. But ultimately, what it's really about is ownership into the world, ownership into a space. When we all create it together, when everybody helps name an NPC together or come up with interesting aspects of a town, now all of a sudden everybody has a buy-in, everybody has a part of it, and everybody gets to have like a little piece of ownership of that space as well. As much as possible, we love to create collaboration within our stories, and have used it even to create like pretty in-depth stories for different things. You used it with the troll story, right?
So we can do this in small ways or in big ways to build some collaboration into the game. So we do this quite a lot when we're homebrewing worlds together. So we'll say, like, the group is going into a town, and then we name the town one letter at a time, and that's the town we now are in. I did this with a group who was traveling through a dungeon, and before they entered into the next room, I put my Game Master screen down, which is sort of my signal that we're pausing the game and going into sort of a collaborative discussion space. And I had them each, we went one letter at a time and named this fantastic troll from a troll of legend, of myth and fantasy. And so they named this troll one letter at a time, and we named it Biagafma.
Which is an amazing troll. Most of the names are incomprehensibly difficult to pronounce. So the fact that it was pronounceable at all was amazing.
You get lots of P's, Q's, and X's.
Yeah.
And then after a while, we realized that pronounceable names are better. So we then had Biagafma. And then I went around the circle and I had everybody describe something that their character knew from their backstory, made up in the moment, for Biagafma. Biagafma is a troll of legend. It's like the boogeyman. It's like Baba Yaga. It's like this historic fantasy troll. We all know what this is, but really we're all making it up right now. And so I went around and had everybody describe what, in whatever their town, village, city they came from, what is a story you'd heard of Biagafma. And every person made up something that enriched their backstory and made Biagafma feel real and scary. And so one player said, my mom told me, and so they're using first person, which I love, my mom told me that if I ever lied, Biagafma would reach in my window and eat me. Or my uncle used to make me go out into the woods and bury offerings to Biagafma. So there's lots of interesting backstory stuff that is coming up in this moment, but also Biagafma is now terrifying. And they've done all that. It's my job as the game master was just to give them the palette, and they've created this terrifying troll of legend, who there's all these cautionary tales about Biagafma. And then when they went into the room, I put my game master screen back up, and then I described Biagafma standing there in front of them, and I'm now playing Biagafma. And that encounter was years ago, and we've done Biagafma in various different forms, and every time it has lasting power. Biagafma also named Boaxel in another campaign, and the players will continue to talk about that troll of legend. I believe it was like 4 or 5 years ago at this point,
yeah.
And they still sometimes talk about Biagafma.
Biagafma also has, especially in Adam's campaign, a very specific voice.
I used to be an actor, and so I do like this. Hello, my name's Biagafma.
So if Biagafma ever comes back, Adam can do that voice, and I would know instantly who that is.
I'm going to do it again.
That's the troll Biagafma again.
I also talked to Adam's daughter in Biagafma voice, and she loves it.
He talks about how
Biagafma a lot.
She's a year old, so she maybe doesn't understand what he's saying. But he'll go like, "I'm going to eat your feet."
She didn't really understand the words that I was saying. She just saw me making a funny face and had a great time. So at a certain point, she will be terrified. Once she really understands the words I'm saying. But until then, I'm going to have a great time with it.
Yeah.
I'll probably have a good time with it after that, too.
Yeah.
You will not have a good time with it.
Just a different kind of good time, right?
I'm going to crawl in your window and eat your toes.
Yeah.
So everything we've talked about so far have been 4 ways that Dungeons & Dragons or other kinds of role-playing games have the potential to improve our lives, to give us this, what we sometimes refer to as social skills. But social skills is sort of a misnomer if you're someone who understands the way that we actually build social capacity.
So one of the reasons Critical Core came around is because I was immersed in the world of social skills groups. And I was watching these children in these groups be told the rules of engagement, right? The rules of interaction, taught them as discrete skills. And these kids in the groups would sit there and fully understand what was being told, like don't invade people's space, you have to compromise, you have to cooperate, you have to take turns in conversation, yada, 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 right? They got all the rules and they sat there, but they all knew that the minute they left that room, they weren't really going to be able to do it because they'd lose their cool, they'd get distracted, they'd get overexcited. And they knew they'd get in trouble for that. And they also knew that the facilitators of the groups would leave the room and not follow the rules. But they wouldn't get in trouble for it because they knew how to do it with all the nuances that come with human interaction. And I just felt like these kids were being set up for failure. And it wasn't doing anything for their self-esteem and their sense of agency. And so looking for a way to provide a safe sandbox where they could practice social skills as incidental to relationships and play and fun and the therapeutic value of fun. Like, why can't these kids come and instead of feel like they're being told all the things they can't do, right? They can come and have fun and learn in the same way we naturally learn social skills, which is, as I said before, through playing with each other. It is through relationships. It is because we want to. Like, I will let you be. I used to play Rocky. Okay, that ages me a bit, but with my best friend.
Rocky and Bullwinkle, or Rocky? Because that would be
Rocky Balboa.
Okay.
And I always wanted to be Rocky, but my best friend was a guy, and he felt like that wasn't really cool, and so I would let him be Rocky time and time and time and time again, because the 10th time, I'd get to be Rocky, which was amazing, and it was all worth it. The point is, I would compromise because he was my best friend, and I really wanted to play the game, not because someone pointed their finger at me and told me you need to compromise. And so that is the way that we naturally learn how to interact with each other, and that is the opportunity that we have in role-playing games to provide that safe space where our young people can practice and practice and practice and practice and have so much fun. We have kids who are so jaded. They've been in therapy since they were 2, they're bored of it, they're fed up, they don't want to go. They start coming to Critical Core, coming to these groups that Game to Grow run, and they're reminding their parents, don't forget, on Thursday I've got group. Because it's fun, that intrinsic value, and that builds, guess what, self-esteem and sense of agency by mimicking the natural opportunities that we have in our younger years.
Who was the person who wasn't Rocky?
Who was I? I can't even, it wasn't important.
It was just some side character. Were you the trainer or the...
I think I was the person he fought.
You were the opponent?
Yeah, I was the opponent.
Okay. That was a guy too, though.
I was, yeah, I know. But Rocky was,
I was just curious. It's totally true. I mean, we have players that come to groups, and it's the only thing they leave the house for that they look forward to. Some of the players who come to our games have never had a friend before. They've never known what it is to have a table where they feel appreciated, or where the other people feel like they want them there. Those things are incredibly valuable, and things that we as a basic human experience want and desire for ourselves is to be appreciated by others, and so being able to set up an opportunity to say, here you go, now you can build some social confidence, some social capacity, because you can come here and feel the reward for it, and feel the intrinsic understanding of why that's important.
And a lot of the players come to our groups with some struggles, with some social struggles, and oftentimes those are referred to as social skills deficits. And I don't particularly like the term deficit because I like to really think about being growth-oriented and helping them achieve what we want, what they want to achieve, what we want their outcomes to be. But it's a useful framework for understanding how we particularly need to help young people. So. Like we said before, a lot of people come to our style of group having been in a social skills training program for a long time. And that's under the assumption that these people need to be taught. Here's how you make eye contact. Here's how you shake hands. Here's how you introduce yourself. But a lot of people, a lot of young people especially, who attend our groups don't need to be taught that. They've been taught that. They don't like to use this skill because it's uncomfortable, or they're not good at these skills. So it's important to think about these three different types of deficits in this context so that we can know the best way to use the game to help them accomplish their goals. So when someone comes in with a knowledge deficit, obviously they don't know the skill. When someone comes in with a performance deficit, it means they don't actually use the skill. So they don't need to be taught, they need to be given an opportunity to practice. With a fluency deficit, we have young people who are really eager and excited to participate with peers, but they're not good at using the skill. We have some participants who have more doctor's visits than there are days in the year. So they're really under-socialized, and they might really try to share their ideas with somebody else, but that turns away their entire group because they don't know how to wait their turn or edge their way into a conversation casually. And these three different types of deficits require a different way of interacting, especially in a game like Dungeons & Dragons. So when someone has a knowledge deficit, they don't know how to, they either don't know the skill or they don't know the opportunities to use the skill. That must be taught. And what's so fantastic about a game like Dungeons & Dragons is that those skills now have context. So if someone doesn't know a skill in a skills training program, we say, here's how to make eye contact and make a good first impression. But a lot of people don't know why that's important. They don't really care about making a good first impression. But if we can introduce a context in a game where all of a sudden there's a sort of success criteria oriented with that skill, there's also a context then for it. So we can have an encounter where I had a group that needed to go get a magical chest plate to reassemble a statue to ward off an evil Lich King. And the chest plate, they knew the last owner of the chest plate, and so they went to his house. And when they got there, they realized that he had recently died. So they got there at a funeral. And of course, the players walked in and they were like, where's the chest plate? And this is an opportunity. Now we realize that maybe a funeral is a different context for a different sort of social decorum. Yes, the world's going to end, but also here's a family that's grieving. Then that was an opportunity for me to teach a skill. Here's how you sort of, give some condolences, validate the family's feelings, compliment the pastries, and then you can find your way to talk about that skill.
I also did this kind of technique more recently in a game where the players were trying to argue on behalf of somebody at their trial. So this person was on trial, and the players had to come in and basically act as their defending attorneys. But there was a whole host of judges. There were 5 judges in this case, and the players had to figure out what arguments to make to each different judge. And they had some information about it, but when it got time to sit down to actually start making their arguments, they were like, "So what are we supposed to do?" and we said, oh, this is a good opportunity to talk about like how do you form an argument. Let's talk about like what an argument actually looks like, or how you would put together a defense for somebody. How would you sort of create logical understanding of this, as well as like an emotional understanding to connect and attune to the judges that you're trying to appeal to. And all the judges had different qualities to them. Like one of them cherished family, and one of them cherished tradition. And so the players had to create arguments that they thought would be most effective for one particular judge or another judge, and they had a chance to present all of these different arguments. So we had a great opportunity to just hop back and forth between like, let's talk about how you can create that argument. Okay, perfect, now you have your argument. Now deliver it as your character, and then we can see what that actually looks like.
For someone with a performance deficit, this is what I was saying, is someone who knows the skill but doesn't like using it. Oftentimes, a lot of the players in our groups have been a victim of bullying at school. So they have a lot of anxiety around being around other people. And so the response there is not to teach the skill, but to encourage the skill and sometimes give some sort of reward for practicing that skill. Oftentimes in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, the reward is that the game is more fun. The storyline progresses when we all work together. So it's very naturally reinforcing in a way that Virginia was just talking about. The way that we learn skills naturally can be totally highlighted, and we can feel very reinforced with an intrinsic motivation to continue to be social and interact with our peers. The game also provides, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition specifically, also provides lots of opportunities. If we need to give a little extrinsic motivation, we can totally do that too. We sometimes use inspiration tokens, but we have a rule where our inspiration tokens are actually bonus tokens, and they can only be used to encourage somebody else to re-roll dice. So we then have a very tokenable, handable, holdable thing that then they can use to interact and improve each other's roll. So it's a very extrinsic motivation that then we can then reinforce that.
One of the things that we know now, now that we're learning so much about how the brain works, is that when we're super stressed, we go limbic. Our upstairs brain, our frontal lobes kind of switch off. And so a lot of the time, when we're being taught things that are difficult and pushed to grow by very well-meaning adults, we are somewhat limbic. We're dysregulated. And that means we're not really learning. We're being compliant at the expense of our personal regulation. One of the things that's really nice about RPGs and play-based therapies is that you can go at the speed of the kid, the speed of the student. And so you push them just far enough that they stay regulated and they're still growing, and then they're learning, and then those skills are generalizable. And that's really perfect for this performance area.
And the third type of deficit that we see a lot is the fluency deficit. And this is someone who is really excited, they want to participate, but they're not very good at it. And the game, because it's so motivating, it provides an awesome opportunity for us to sort of coach and provide a little bit of assistance and feedback to help them out. If somebody already wants to practice and already wants to learn the skill, then Dungeons & Dragons is a perfect place, because then we can just help usher them along the way and give them very clear success criteria, which is oftentimes really challenging for a lot of our players. So we talked a lot about all this stuff coming from our perspectives. The next thing I'm going to show you is actually we have some of our participants. We recorded them talking about their experience. This is actually part of the thing that we've talked about a little bit is Critical Core, which is a Kickstarter project we have out right now. And so I have a video in case you haven't.
Wait, before you play, has anybody in the room backed Critical Core on Kickstarter?
Hey!
Yeah. For those of you who don't know yet, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but Critical Core is a take-home kit for parents and teachers and therapists to learn RPGs, and specifically oriented at building social capacity for individuals who are autistic. But it's really about building social capacity. It's extended way past autism-related challenges and into just anybody with social isolation. It's designed with a facilitator's guide and a module that are oriented and specifically to help the game master learn the skills necessary in order to start doing a lot of the work that we do. So you can back it at criticalcore.org. You can get a link to it. But this is the video from our Kickstarter about some of our players who are talking about their experiences.
Before I even played this, I would tease people a lot, and I wouldn't know how they would feel. When I was teased, I would know how I'd feel. I was more self-centered into myself instead of other people. Now I'm more into knowing how other people feel.
A cool thing that's happened in the game is just getting to know all these different people and working together and just having fun in this adventure world.
I feel like I've become a lot more like in control of my actions. Like I think through stuff a lot more, which is kind of weird because in the game my character's kind of reckless.
The friendships that I've had have become better because of this.
I've gotten out a lot more. I've played more games with other people. I'm GMing a game now. I feel like it's been really sort of a great stepping stone into the world of tabletop RPGs.
After playing Critical Core, I cannot wait till next Wednesday.
Over the years of him being in different kinds of therapy, we've had issues of a lack of transference of skills that he's worked on in therapy has been an isolated event, and he has a hard time transferring those skills into school, into the family circle, and this has been different because he talks about his characters. The characters have, and the adventures he goes on, and what he struggles with has become part of our dinner conversations, part of when we're putting him to bed, how he interacts with us. He's been talking about them.
Playing Critical Core has helped me just be able to talk with other people and just feel more comfortable going up to other people and talking with them, and just like being able to make conversation.
So you can check out criticalcore.org to learn more about that. So let's talk about some of the things you can actually do besides back in Critical Core to improve your personal game. Raise your hand if you're someone who does a session 0. Awesome. So a lot of you already know how a session 0 works, but this is one of the best ways that you can get your group oriented towards being the kind of group that you want to play in, which would be a good way for you to have a safe enough space for you to orient yourself to build skills in a game like Dungeons & Dragons. So session 0 happens before session 1, before you start playing, and it's an opportunity for you to talk about things you want to have in your game and things you don't want to have in your game, and also to set up some routines for when stuff comes up, how you navigate it.
One of the things we like to do during session 0 is to establish an X card. The way an X card works is that it's basically a 3x5 card. You draw a big X on it with a Sharpie, and then everybody has one in front of them. And if at any point in the game anybody feels overwhelmed, anybody feels like the game has become too much for them, they can flip over their X card, and that's a designation that everybody's aware of. That means that they can step away from the table, and there will be no consequences to that. If they need that space, they can step away. Nothing bad will happen to their character during that time, and they can use that in order to help calm down, to re-regulate, to do whatever it is that they need to do in that time. Many dungeon masters will even say, if somebody flips over the X card, it's a time, we'll take a break. It's time for a 5-minute break, everybody. You take a break, there's no questions asked, and it doesn't need to be something that is brought up as a big deal. It can just be something that somebody can really easily set a boundary for themselves. This can be really, really helpful, especially if you're going to touch on any themes in your game that may be challenging to approach. People like to play dark games or games with fear or difficult concepts, and so long as everybody in the table is okay with that, the X card can be a nice tool in your tool belt to basically make sure that the table remains a safe space for everybody to be at.
Another thing that we often use in a session 0 is what I call a no list and a please list. And I give each player, and our players are as young as 8 and as old as early 20s. So we have groups that are clustered in age group, and different age groups can handle different themes and different content and different capacities. But I hand everybody, no matter which group, I hand everybody a 3x5 card, and I tell them to write the word no at the top, underline it, and then write down things they 100% do not want to have in the game. So if anybody has a trauma history around anything in particular, they can put that down. If there's anything that they want to have none of at all, and sometimes there's sensitivities around cursing. It might not be a trauma response. It's just the game that I want to play. So I'll pass this out, and I'll get it back confidentially, and I'll keep them all, and I'll make a sort of a master list that I will show to everyone with nobody has to claim anything that they put on there as being their personal thing from their no list, but we make it very public. And oftentimes there's no sexuality in the game, or no sexual content. Oftentimes there's no torture. no slavery. There's also no homophobia has come up a lot of times because a lot of the players in our groups are struggling with discovering their own identity in this world that is not very tolerant. So why don't we play a game where we don't have to worry about that? My character can be gender neutral, and that's just not an issue. And that's the world that they want to play in, and that's the world that I want to enable them to practice and play in. So the no list is clear 100%. And then the please list is their opportunity to advocate for the things that they want in the game. So this might be stuff like, I want to have, instead of just kings giving us all of the missions, I want to have a queen. Let's just mix up, like, why is it always a patriarchal society? Can't we just have a queen give orders? So those things are easy for me to do. Sometimes there's things on the please list like, let's have a Megazord. Like, we need to have a Megazord in this camp. And I'm like, okay. But I did it. We had the Megazord last Thursday. I figured it out. So that's a great way for players to feel like their voices matter. And that just creating a safe space for your players is a great way for them to feel welcome enough to then advocate for themselves when other things come up in the game, whether that's using an X card, whether we have other things. I stole something from my grandmother. So I didn't steal it from my grandmother. That's a bad phrasing. My grandmother uses a phrase a lot around my grandfather. So my grandfather, sometimes he's 95 and sometimes he starts to like go on a tangent. And so she says, I'm pulling down the shade. She's from Texas. I'm pulling down the shade. And her signal is to be like, we're going to change the topic of conversation right now. And so I will give that tool to my players. If we're ever doing something that just feels like we want to just wrap it up, if it's maybe a combat or if it's an encounter with an NPC that we're not enjoying, we're just going to pull down the shade.
Move on from this.
Some game masters call that fade to black, but I like to bring my grandmother into it.
Plus then you can do the accent.
Yeah, I can do the accent. That's true.
All right, we do have other take-home tips, and we could keep going on about that, but I promised a little bit of time for a Q&A, and we've got exactly a little bit of time left. So there are some microphones that are in the back. If you'd like to line up for any questions, while people are lining up, I'll remind you all that Critical Core is currently on Kickstarter. We are fully funded. We're way past fully funded. We're aiming towards stretch goals. Thank you so much. So your support means a lot. It means that we can get more kits into people's hands. Critical Core has levels that you can back at where you donate kits to other places. So even if you don't think you need a kit for yourself, you can totally donate a kit to somebody else, donate it to a hospital or a school or a library. And before we jump into questions, I want to thank everybody for coming to the talk and coming to PAX East and having a great time at PAX East. Awesome. That being said, why don't we start over here on this side with the first question.
Great. Hi. So thank you guys. First of all, this was amazing. I spend my summers running a board game studio at a summer program for like 7th, 8th, 9th graders. And as part of that, we do a lot of D&D and tabletop stuff. And I find that a lot of the students I'd love to bring into that, when I suggested to them, there's this big social stigma around like, oh, but I don't want to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, no, I think you should come. But a lot of them just don't show up. So do you have any tips for getting students in the door who maybe have that like, oh, this is a nerd game kind of background?
Yes. So this is for the students, right? Okay. So ultimately, there is still very much a stigma, and depending on age is going to depend drastically on the kind of approach that you do. Ultimately, this is about making the pitch appeal to the students at the table. So sometimes that may mean not using the phrase Dungeons and Dragons. It may mean saying like, I've got an awesome game, it's a lot of fun, it's storytelling in a fantasy world, you're gonna show up and we're gonna tell an awesome story and you're gonna play these really cool characters and do epic stuff. So it's a really quick, tight pitch to like, what is the fun of the experience that you're trying to offer to them. Sometimes it can be a little bit more the other side, and it really depends a lot on the players and how much time you have. If I can get somebody engaged, I know they're going to stand there awkwardly until I let them go, then I can really dig into the pitch. Now I can be like, it's Dungeons and Dragons, and let me tell you what that looks like. You're standing in a room and you see that there's dust on all the walls. Like, then you can lay it in thick. Go all the way. Keep talking until they basically tell you to shut up, or they like clearly have to go to the bathroom. That's like the place that you can give them a little sense for what that experience actually looks like. We find that pretty much everybody, when they sit down at a table, when they actually like start playing Dungeons and Dragons, they go, man, this is really fun. And that's the experience that you want to kind of create for them in that moment, that little snippet.
Sure. So one of the rules we live by as DMs, right, is to try to say no unless there's those critical situations. I was curious, in using role-playing in a situation where it is therapeutic, aside from the yes and no list, which I thought was an interesting idea, do you find yourself, are there other, I guess, cases where it does necessitate having to say no, or do you never run into that issue when you use it therapeutically?
So the question is, are there times where you have to say no when using it therapeutically? Do you have an answer for that, Adam?
So, to be perfectly honest, there was a lot of echo and I missed most of the question.
I mean,
the speaker's on the bad side for Adam's ear. What I'll say is, yes. There are challenges that come up in a group setting when you're doing therapy that are like a general concept of group therapy, where the group has to be ready to hold the space for a particular issue. So if there are issues that come up in a group setting that the group is not ready to handle that issue, for instance, you're coming to a group setting to talk about like DBT skills, but somebody really wants to talk about their suicidality. That may not be the right setting for it, and the rest of the group may not be prepared yet to support that. In those particular instances, you have to set a boundary. You have to be able to set a space to say, this is very important, and I want to be able to talk about this, and you and I can have a conversation about this afterwards, one-on-one. This group's not a good place for it because I don't feel like they're going to support you in that. And so there definitely are issues in the same way in like a therapeutic Dungeons and Dragons group that may come up in that same fashion, where you may need to set a hard boundary and be like, this is really important. I want you to feel like you're heard, and also that we're going to touch base about this and have a real conversation about this. But I don't think we can address this in group today.
So what Adam's doing there is he's using a really simple strategy where he has to set a boundary, but instead of saying, no, we can't do that here, he says a you can statement, right? Yeah. So you can move your body over there. It's not safe right here to jump around. Or we have one player right now who, whenever we're in a combat situation, wants to throw stuff around the room. So he can do that in the corner by the mats where we've set up a safe space, right? But he, and so that's a really simple strategy that you're using and that we use very deliberately to help with that boundary setting, so it's not just a negative that they're hearing.
Thank you.
We got 3 minutes left, so we'll try to finish off these last questions real quick. Unless you drop the mic on the ground.
So you said you're trying to get Game to grow in more communities, and you have some kind of facilitator certification program. How do I become a facilitator and get it in my community?
Awesome. The question is, how do you become a facilitator for Game to Grow? So Game to Grow right now is hiring facilitators that we're training in-house to serve our community in the Seattle area. If you happen to be in the Seattle area and you would like to be a Game to Grow therapist, send a resume. Oh man, I might regret this, but jobs@gametogrow.org, a resume and a cover letter, and we can consider you for any open positions. If you're not in the area but you're just looking for training, follow the newsletter at Game to Grow. There's a checkbox for training. We're going to be hopefully releasing some like webinars and similar training opportunities that will be coming up in the near future to try to get other people help started with their own groups in the future.
Hey, so most of the things that you've talked about for children or teens and stuff like that, my local store, we have some adults that have not learned a lot of these skills. Are there any tips or tricks to get them more engaged or, more comfortable at the games too?
Yeah, I think that like a lot of the kind of tips that we already offered, and we have a whole bunch more, are work great at kind of any age. The reality is this, like, social capacity building happens for everybody. I'm standing up in front of a stage and talking to all these people, and I talk at a table all day. I still am working on building social capacity. There are advanced skills that we continue to develop throughout our entire lifetimes, and it's not unreasonable to assume that a lot of the stuff that's effective at younger ages is just as effective at adult ages. If you are looking for some extra skills, come and grab a business card or reach out to us online. I would love to send you an email with a few other suggestions that would be worthwhile or useful to you.
Thanks.
All right, I think the last question.
So It's loud. So I'm just starting actually a therapeutic role-playing group, and one of the big challenges for teens that I've had is talking to parents about it. So what advice do you have for approaching parents about having them involved in a D&D group for therapy?
Adam, do you capture that one? This is your perfect one. What advice do you have for talking to parents about?
So we learned a lot about this early on because we love Dungeons and Dragons, love it. And so when we were first starting the organization that we ran before Game to Grow, we were going to PTA meetings and talking to principals and stuff. And we were like, here's Dungeons and Dragons, and there's characters, and there's swords, and it's awesome. And they do not care about that at all. So we had to learn sort of the hard way that what they care about is the thing we have to talk to them about. So for parents, parents want to see their kid have fun with other kids. That's the thing that they need. They want to see their kid fit in. And that doesn't mean fit the mold. That means have a community. And so what you're providing when you're providing an opportunity for that kid to come play in a social group like a D&D group is an opportunity to fit in and to feel welcome and feel excited about seeing other kids. And so that's the story. That when you're talking to a parent, tell a story. Ideally, there's a success story you have already where you can say, imagine, here's a situation that a young person might go through. Is that something that you think would be good for your child? And you want to paint the picture of the journey and then have them understand that that's an opportunity that their kid could have in this group. But it's really thinking about making friends, being with other kids, maybe reminding them that there's no screens, it's not a video game. Super important. A lot of parents don't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So especially for kids who are sort of technologically immersed, it's really valuable to say, there's no screens here. We're actually making up stories together.
So we're up on time. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for PAX East. Have a great rest of your con. If you have any extra questions, come and chat with us afterwards or at the table down by the Table Titans booth.